This piece caught my eye in the thehub.ca. Great radical ideas. Dare to be great is the headline. 10 radical ideas to restore Canada's promise in 2025. The author is Eric Lombardi. Eric is a management consultant in the tech and finance spaces. He also runs More Neighbours Toronto, a volunteer organization committed to ending the housing crisis. Eric Lombardi, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Dan. Thank you for having me.
Loving your commentary lately in the Hub, I have to say. Whenever we have more YIMBYs, that always pleases me. Yes, in my backyard. Now, it's not such a common movement here in Montreal, unfortunately, because it's a real NIMBY city here. But in Toronto, it is getting more popular. Are you seeing some movement? Are things being built up in Toronto a bit more lately?
You know, sometimes it depends on the day that you ask me. Sometimes I feel pretty optimistic that things have gotten bad enough on housing that people have recognized that we need to do more, go further, and, get out of the way in some cases. Other days, we see, our city council on Friday said, you're not allowed to open a corner store in a neighborhood. So, sometimes you have wins, sometimes you don't.
So ending NIMBYism is one of the 10 points you mentioned in the piece, 10 big ideas for Canada. Restoring property rights. And you talk about zoning a little bit, but how do you pinpoint the problem of NIMBYism?
To me, NIMBYism is about the ability of people to almost litigate against their neighbors and what their neighbors intend to do with their property and what I would define as reasonable wishes. So if you live in Toronto and this city has a huge housing crisis, and the infrastructure that actually serves your property would make it possible for you to build a 4-story or a 6-story small apartment building, the central government shouldn't be able to tell you that you can't. And in a lot of ways, we do. So effectively, my opinion on property rights is people should more or less have the right to rebuild their property in an economically feasible way. And if that's not really possible, then a fundamental right has been taken.
Here in Montreal, we limit the size of buildings based on the height of our mountain. Did you know about that? The height of Mount Royal, you can't build anything taller, even if it's not even anywhere near.
I did
not. No, okay. So Eric, please read up on this. You're gonna ride up a storm once you find out more about this. But it's not even doesn't even apply to stuff that's directly up against the mountain. Obviously, you don't want to block a view or edge in on any green space. It applies to anything, anywhere, pretty much. I mean, people wonder why Montreal has a small skyline. That's the reason why.
I mean, I'm so amazed that somehow Toronto managed to build the CN Tower in the 1970s. I think if anyone proposed something, there would be protests. The mayor would be against it. So we've really become a culture in which we just say no immediately. And I think that's something that needs to change.
Let's talk about some of your other ideas in the piece. 10 radical ideas for Canada. Electricity. What's your vision there, and how do we produce more cheap, clean energy?
Yeah. So if you actually look at Canada's electricity grid, and Quebec is actually a great example of this, it's actually almost clean already from sources that are either renewable or clean. Ontario uses a big component of nuclear. And if we actually look at where industries are going, look at the compute power required to drive AI data centers, for instance, or advanced manufacturing. Electricity is going to become the crucial input as the world decarbonizes in just about every industry. And that means we should have that input be as cheap as possible here. And that's good for consumers and businesses because it makes all of our decisions around what we consume cheaper to choose an electric option versus one with a fossil fuel. And as we're having, Pierre Poilievre calling it the carbon tax election, a carbon tax which was meant to apply increased costs to fuel so that people can choose cleaner options, cheap electricity and abundant electricity actually does the opposite. It makes the clean solutions that are almost always electric the cheaper option. And so, to me, let's double down on an advantage that we already have and really position Canada and Canadians to consume more electricity, to raise their living standards, and attract a lot of industry and businesses that in the future will almost all be electrified.
Eric Lombardi with us. He writes at thehub.ca on 10 radical ideas to reinvent Canada. I like number 6, busting oligopolies and breaking interprovincial trade barriers. Now, there's some news on that front today as Anita Anand has added a ministry to her portfolio, which I believe is internal trade. So maybe that's a signal that the government might tackle this issue, hopefully?
I find, the level of visibility on this issue to be very sad at a political level. And the interprovincial barriers to trade in Canada add about 7% on average to the cost of all the goods and services that people consume. And so I think people really underestimate just how much of a burden these trade barriers between provinces are. And barriers can be legislative, but oftentimes they're more regulatory. Like, hey, I am an engineer who works in Ontario, but that credential doesn't allow me to work in Quebec or in the same capacity. And so in a lot of ways, we actually just need to bring down these credential barriers. We have many different regulatory agencies for the same thing. Financial services is a great example where each province has their own security regulator. So a provincially regulated credit union in Alberta can't actually offer services to someone in Saskatchewan. And this makes our entire economy less competitive. And so, if I could wave a magic wand, I would just say, there are 0 barriers within Canada and we should have a common market. But that's easier said than done.
You mentioned competition as well. Do you think that's a virtue? And to tie it all together at the end of the piece, you say real federalism, real accountability. What's your general big idea in terms of how to reform our country's economics to not make business so dependent on the state?
This last piece I think is important, and it's a difficult subject. But about 30% of all federal transfers are actually to provinces, and I'm not just talking about equalization, on healthcare, infrastructure, all these things that are actually in provincial jurisdiction. I think the first thing that the federal government should do is just transfer those tax points directly to the provinces and have far fewer strings attached in areas of provincial jurisdiction. And I think Quebec has more of its own identity, but in Ontario, people really don't understand the difference between the Conservatives, Liberals, and NDP provincially versus federally, and so they don't know who to blame for which section of the economy that isn't working for them, whether it's healthcare or infrastructure, et cetera. So I think the federal government really needs to simplify, be much more responsible for trade, both internally and externally, and defense, and allow provinces the full scope of what they're jurisdictionally supposed to do: healthcare, infrastructure, education, et cetera. And then tax reform really is on the expenditure side. We call them tax expenses. But there's more than $100 billion there of all these different carve-outs where the federal government or even provincial governments are trying to get people to do certain behaviors. And typically, the results actually don't work, but we've kept a lot of these things around. This makes our tax code complex and increases the cost of compliance for everyone, whether you're an individual or you are a business. So we really need to look at simplifying these things so that people can actually hold governments accountable to what they're supposed to be doing and to what they're actually paying for.
You can read Eric's full piece at thehub.ca. Eric Lombardi writes about 10 radical ideas to reinvent Canada. He is the founder and president of More Neighbours Toronto, an organization committed to ending the housing crisis. Hey, I think we need one of those here, Eric, because every time I talk to a housing advocate, as I did earlier in the show today, no one says just let's build a bunch of houses. It's just, I don't know. I feel like I'm in the bizarro universe here sometimes, but we appreciate your perspective today. Thanks for stopping by.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.